Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, it is I am the one and only Sonic the Hedgehog here, aka the Blue Blur, aka Blue Justice, and I am back for the likes of the Mexi Toys videos here. So, after the events of episode Metal, despite the fact that that particular episode is extremely short, and relatively speaking, we ended up in certain stages based off from Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1, so here we are now on to Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 2. Now, as far as I'm aware, both Episode 2 as well as Episode Metal, again, if you managed able to buy both of those episodes in one of those systems, ranging from the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, or smartphones for that matter, except on the Wii, because obviously though, the WiiWare does not usually contain Episode 2 on there, probably because of the graphical limitations, and I'll explain more about that if we dive into Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 2. So generally speaking, I was about the fact that this game did release around 2 years after the release of Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1, because usually relatively speaking, I was about the fact that, like I stated before, Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 2 as well as Episode Metal, both episodes did manage to came out in 2012, and sometime in Journey Falls have been springtime, so as you can see on screen, I have decided able to return back onto the PlayStation 3 version, just because after playing through Episode Metal on a different system, which is of course the Xbox 360, so as a result that was about the fact that we can now able to actually wrap things up every single aspect in terms of the majority of the Sonic the Hedgehog 4 saga, despite the fact that there is no sign of Episode 3, which as a result though, we'll explain more about that if we dive into this. So here we go on to Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 2, and we immediately start things off with the very first zone in this episode, and that's what appears to be Sylvania Castle Zone. Alright, so it usually starts things off with a cinematic cutscene this time around, which is actually a nice little addition. So as you can see, about the fact that this is Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 2, it plays very similar to Episode 1, except there are some noticeable differences. Like for one, obviously though, is about the fact that we can able to take control of Sonic and Tails this time around. In addition to that though, is about the fact that as you can tell, the graphical style is remarkably different from Episode 1. Like, I will say though, the graphics in this game certainly looks a lot more nicer compared to the fonts of how it does it in Episode 1 in my opinion, because usually relatively speaking I was about the fact that it's usually in 2.5D as opposed to likely out of place graphical style from the sake of the fonts of Episode 1, but I will admit it though, it looks certainly a lot more greater than the fonts of how it does it on Episode 1 to me. Although, I will admit though right away though, is about the fact that like Episode 1 though, it lacks identity. So because of this though, certain zones are still basically reused from the majority of Sonic the Hedgehog 2, most likely. Like for instance, in Sylvania Castle Zone, this zone is almost inspired by Aquatic Mine Zone, or specifically Aquatic Ruin Zone from Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Like for instance though, is about the fact that as you can tell, there's a lot of water underneath it, and generally speaking I was about the fact that, well, we'll talk more details about the fonts of the majority of Sylvania Castle Zone until whenever we get onto the later acts in the zone. So obviously though, as you can see, we've somehow completed Act 1 already. Now as you can see, we immediately jump into the giant ring at the end of the zone, because yes, much like the fonts of how it does it in Episode 1, in order to able to actually access the special stage, you need to able to collect 50 rings, and then once you get 50 or more rings, you're able to actually jump into the special stage right here. And in terms of the special stage itself, we got ourselves a familiar special stage formula, which appears to be the half pipe. So as a result, yeah, almost inspired by the fonts of the most of the Sonic games in the past, ranging from Sonic the Hedgehog 2, as well as Sonic 3D Blast for the Sega Saturn version, Sonic Pocket Adventure, as well as the fonts of Sonic Rush, Sonic Colors on the DS version, heck, even especially noticeable with Sonic Generations for the 3DS, although, except the fact that obviously though we have Tails on our side. So because of this though, yeah, the objective in this kind of special stage right here is very similar to Sonic the Hedgehog 2, where basically though is about the fact that we have to go for 3 different sections in these special stage, and your objective is pretty simple. Collect most of the rings, and then once you reach at the end of that segment, if you do have enough rings, you move on to the next. And then once you complete all 3 segments, you get yourselves a Chaos Emerald. So, nothing new for that particular formula, I don't think, apart from the fact that there are some, few new additions here and there. Like, for instance, it's about the fact that out of nowhere we get ourselves a timer right here, which I'm not exactly sure what that does, personally, because I know for a fact that, yeah, much like the forms of how it does in Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1, it's been a very long time since I actually have last played this game for sure, ever since back in June it informs about the fact that, well, much like the forms of how it does in Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1, I think, relatively speaking, I was about the fact that this is now our another redo Let's Play of Sonic the Hedgehog 4, but this time with Episode 2, but there are some noticeable differences here and there, that basically, though, we originally did this back in 2015, as well as 2017, with some similar issues that we have when we did our, Let's Plays of Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1 back in the past. Like, for instance, in 2015, the quality is okay, but it's just about the fact that, again, the sound mixing is incredibly bad, and not to mention, though, you can't really hear not only the background music, but as well as the commentary as well. And as far as 2017 is concerned, the quality is a little better, but it's just about the fact that the commentary is pretty awful, because obviously, though, we have to deal with the forms of this muffled, microphone, as you can definitely tell. But of course, those particular playthroughs are now removed, probably because of, no matter what though, also there's not enough views back then. So either way, now as you can see, the momentum is actually a lot better than the forms of how it does it on Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1, because for instance though, if you try to roll into a ball, if you come towards the slope, basically though, we are no longer entering this huzzah pose, and basically though, it's about the fact that it makes the entire momentum or physics has been slightly tweaked. So generally speaking, though, it's about the fact I can totally see why that some players tend to prefer Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episodes 2 over the likes of Episode 1, but as I said this before, it's about the fact that this game certainly lacks originality, and especially noticeably lacks identity as well. Like, for instance, though, it's about the fact that there's still no luck in terms of the forms of elemental shields, because instead we're going on to Sonic 1 flavor again, and generally speaking, in terms of power-ups wise, it feels remarkably similar to not only in Sonic 1, but as well as Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1. Although there is that one new item that is only going to be exclusive to this game, which we'll talk more about that during at some point until tomorrow, because as a result, yes, today's date, of course, there is the, I want to say today is the 19th of October today, in some cases in 2024 today, so generally speaking, it was about the fact that we've only got about roughly 6 days left now, or technically 3 days left, until well, in terms of the forms of early access when it comes to Digital Deluxe Edition of Sonic Cross Shadow Generations, or should I say, Sonic X Shadow Generations is almost about to be approaching it to its release, and I'm still looking forward to that game once we do manage to able to deal with the forms of some bad Sonic games. Although, I'm not saying about the fact that Episode 2 is not bad, but I think about the fact that it was actually kind of okay, but it does have some similar issues as I have from the likes of Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1. Like, for instance, it's about the fact that, yes, much like Episode 1, this game is filled to the brim with a lot of springs and speed boosters, and relatively speaking, it just feels a little bit more autopilot more than anything. So generally speaking, yeah, I'm not too fussed about that. But there's actually something new into this game that was actually introduced. That's what appears to be a teamwork system, where you can able to actually just try to do such specific actions. Like, for instance, in Act 1, in Sylvania Castle Zone, basically though it's about the fact that we have to press the square button or the X button, depending on what system you play on. Basically though, you can able to perform a tag action, where basically though, in Act 1, Tails can able to carry you while simply trying to fly, and in Act 2, as you can tell, basically though, you can able to actually use Tails to able to actually swim about. Now, as far as the third and final act, although, relatively speaking, the entire structure of Episode 2 plays pretty similar to the forms of how it does it in Episode 1, except the fact that obviously though is about the fact that certain zones are completely different, despite the fact that some zones are basically reused from the likes of certain zones from Sonic the Hedgehog 2. So either way, also not to mention though is about the fact that the Chaos Emerald color order is going to be also very similar to Sonic the Hedgehog 2 as well, although about the fact that I don't think it's possible we can able to come across into a pink Chaos Emerald, unlike in Sonic the Hedgehog 2 that is. So But I digress though. And also, much like in episode 1, if you manage to make a mistake in the forms of the special stages department though, you can simply just try to able to retry by simply pausing the game and select retry if you want to continuously try to do multiple attempts all over again. So it's just about the fact that much like in Sonic the Hedgehog 2, in addition to Sonic 3D Freaky's Island for the Sega Saturn, as well as the forms of Sonic Pocket Adventure, that you have to memorize the forms of those ring layouts and stuff like that. Although there's actually that particular trophy or achievement you can able to get, it's only in the forms within the first special stage, luckily. It's actually kind of tricky to me, because obviously though we have to collect every single rings in special stage 1. Unless if I decided able to actually connect to my other controller, then it should make things a lot more easy to manage, but I couldn't figure out how to do all that, because obviously though, because you'll be automatically running too fast. Although there's actually a new feature in the special stage, by the way, is that if you hold down the square button or the X button, depending on what system you play on, basically though it's about the fact that you can able to actually sprint, or in some cases running. However though, your momentum might get a little bit stiff if you manage to able to try to run too fast. So if I were you, you might be able to slow down a bit, so just in case that not only you can able to actually try to avoid not only the returning mine bombs, but as well as the forms of those new electricity objects, which as a result though, it allows you to able to get stunned. So yeah, generally speaking, that's as far as I can usually try to describe about the forms of episode 2 special stage. Well, usually, as you can tell, we've already collected 2 Chaos Emeralds so far, so naturally we've only got 5 of them left. So I'm pretty sure it's about the fact that similar to episode 1, I do believe it is definitely possible we can able to actually get 6 Chaos Emeralds in this part, but then until tomorrow anyway, we can definitely guarantee to able to get ourselves the 7th and the final Chaos Emerald in that particular process. And wow, look how stunning the background is this time around, because I do like the actual detail about the fact that in Act 1 and Act 2, it does manage to take place in daylight. In Act 3, as well as the boss fight coming up, it does manage to take place in nighttime. So yeah, I do like the actual specific detail, and usually relatively speaking, I was about the fact that, well, I'm still fully appreciate about the fact that the physics has been slightly tweaked since then, and generally speaking, it's nowhere near as fluid as the classic titles, but this is still a massive improvement over the likes of episode 1 in my opinion. So, but as far as I'm aware, yeah, let me know in the comments down below for the question of the day. Have you guys ever played Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 2? And do you think this episode is a lot better than Episode 1? Well, let me know in the comments down below, because I would like to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. So, but I digress. And also, there's also another thing it's worth mentioning for actually, is that I'm pretty concerned about the fact that I'm pretty much guaranteed for the fact that we've only got about a couple of weeks left until Mario Luigi Brothership is going to be releasing, and we still have no idea who's going to be the developer for the likes of Mario Luigi Brothership, because I already know for a fact it's no longer going to be Alpha Dream, because it's going to be involved around a different developer. So we'll have to wait and see what happens during at some point until November, because, well, straight to the point is about the fact that we've only got about exactly 13 more days to go until we're about to be approaching on to the 11th month in 2024, and as of course November. So as a result, and also we might able to actually hear about the forms of the updated Switch game sales units, alongside with the forms of the Nintendo Switch console sales units here and there, but we'll have to wait and see. So because of that though, expecting to stay tuned for that when it comes to that particular topic, and join at some point for the last few batch of Let's Plays for 2024, before we move on to, 2025. So, but I digress. And I will say though is about the fact that the homing attack is used a lot better in this episode than the forms of how it does it in episode 1, because relatively speaking though, in episode 1, the homing attack is a little bit unnecessary to me, because obviously though, not only it comes out of nowhere, but it's also about the fact that, well, in some sections of the stage, you do able to actually come across into repeated enemy placements, like for instance with these bubble enemies, and usually, relatively speaking, you have to do the ridiculous amount of homing attack chains when it comes to the majority of the bubbles for the sake of the forms of trying to able to go from one place to the other, and generally speaking, it's about the fact that it's usually underutilized. Although thankfully in episode 2 though, as you can tell, basically though is about the fact that we can now use the homing attacks into specific aspects, but I still find it's a little bit unnecessary in my opinion. But regardless of everything else though, is about the fact that you pretty much get to what I was expecting to mention about that. So, But as I stated before, it's about the fact that usually Episode 2, alongside with Episode Metal, only came out in journey forms upon the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, PC, Steam, and of course mobile devices, because unlike the WiiWare, does not exist, and as a result though, that's the reason why that this episode never came onto the Wii, because of the graphical limitations. So because of that though, as I stated before, because this game utilizes 2.5D graphics, and relatively speaking when it comes to special stages department though, it's going to be involved around entirely in 3D, so generally speaking it will be pretty hard to emulate the Wii when it comes to the forms of trying to able to release Episode 2, because much like Sonic CD 2011 remastered version, that obviously though, that particular version never came out on the Wii because it involves the graphical limitations, or perhaps even maybe because, well, for unknown reasons I guess. So but as you can see, we've now come across those electricity objects, as you can see, but if you dare touch them though, as I stated earlier, you get stunned for a bit, and as a result you will slow down, so I suppose that's the only thing you do have to worry about this, I guess. So yeah, nothing else I can really say about this, I guess. But there's also a new item we can able to introduce into ourselves, well, it's not going to be until for later though, it's just we're able to dive into special stage number 4, so generally speaking it's about the fact that it can take a bit while to able to actually complete these special stages every once in a while, because, well, relatively speaking unlike in Episode 1, that basically though, oh, okay, there's the power-up I was on about earlier, okay, yeah, basically, as you can see, we got ourselves a tether system, where basically though is about the fact that if you manage to obtain that item, you can able to actually tag with tails, and then you can simply try to collect rings that way, which is kind of hard for me to explain, because as I stated before, it's been about 7 years ago since I actually have last played this game for sure, since back in Journey Phones in 2017, to go alongside with the celebration of the release of Sonic Mania during that time. So there we go, 3 Chaos Emeralds done, and only 4 more to go. So generally speaking yeah, much like in Episode 1, it is so ridiculously easy to get extra lives in this game. So either way, now as you can see, we've somehow unlocked the rolling combo, where basically though you're able to actually activate the most overpowered spin dash I've ever seen in a Sonic game. Well, usually we'll talk more about that if we go on to the next zone, because as you can see, we now ended up on the very first boss in Episode 2, so I'm hoping about the fact that Episode 2 doesn't bring any rehashed boss fights, unlike in Episode 1, so either way though, yeah, structurally speaking though, it plays very similar to Episode 1, that usually in each and every single zone still manage to have 3 acts per zone, in addition to a boss fight every once in a while. However, this time around though, as you can see, we can now able to actually guarantee to get a maximum of 50 rings before the fight starts, so yeah, that's actually kind of interesting. Are you kidding me? They decided able to reuse their particular familiar boss fight from the likes of Aquatic Ruin Zone from Sonic 2, and oh, okay, this boss is actually a lot different this time. Okay, at least I'll give it some credit for, but there's one particular gripe I have with these boss fights in Episode 2 compared to Episode 1. For Episode 1, I feel like certain boss fights are kind of laughable, not only for its rehashed ideas, but it's also about the fact it's ridiculously easy, apart from, you know, the final boss in particular. In Episode 2 this time around though, the boss fights are definitely a little bit more original this time. Although, there's only one gripe I have with this though, is that sometimes it can take forever to try to deal with certain boss fights. And oh, believe me, what I'm saying is that once we get to Sonic Superstars, you'll see nothing yet. Especially concerning for the fact that it feels more likely like a waiting game, rather than just trying to able to actually go and try to make things a little bit more quicker as possible. So, anyway, onto the boss fight itself. Basically though, it's about the fact that in order to deal the amount of damage to Dr. Eggman with this very peculiar plant robot of any sort, basically though, that's what the tag action decides to come into play. And basically though, it's about the fact that once the actual Eggman's face has been revealed, with the actual specific thing you have to attack on, well, basically though, you have to wait until when this particular pedal thing decides able to open up, and now it's your chance to able to keep on attacking him. And as a result though, that's all you have to do in this boss fight. Although, relatively speaking though, it's the very first boss in the game, so expecting things to be a lot more simple and easier. So, but relatively speaking though, it's about the fact that, well, for the most part, I don't mind this boss fight until later on, that is, because potentially speaking though, there was that one particular fight that attempts to drag on, which as a result though, you'll see why, and during at some point until tomorrow, because, well, relatively speaking though, it's still gonna be the weekend for its uploading schedules department anyway. So there we go, the first boss is done, and that pretty much does it for, well, Sylvania Castle Zone. So generally speaking, yeah, this zone is alright. I mean, usually relatively speaking, not even compared to later on though, which again, we'll discuss more about that until tomorrow. So either way though, there's also worth noting for actually, is that much like the forms of how it does it in both Sonic Colors as well as Sonic Generations, you do realize there is actually that particular collectible we keep on collecting. Well, usually at the moment right now, so far we somehow collected 2 of those familiar red star ring items, and basically those about the fact that unlike in Sonic Colors as well as Sonic Generations, they in each and every single level does manage to contain a grand total of 5 red star rings each. Well, in Sonic 4 Episode 2, there's only 1 per level, so generally speaking, that was about the fact that you can only find 1 in these well-hidden areas, and relatively speaking though, unlike in Sonic Colors, you were able to actually access to special levels in Sonic Simulator, well, specifically on the Wii version, in addition to Sonic Colors Ultimate, by the way. And in addition to that though, on the DS version, you can simply unlock some concept arts in the gallery options, and same applies with the forms of Sonic Generations on the Xbox 360/PlayStation 3, including the upcoming Sonic X Shadow Generations, by the way, or specifically though, the remastered version of Sonic Generations for that matter. However though, in this game in particular, they're just there for the sake of the achievements or trophy, and if I like to recall this, the worst kind of collectible in my opinion. So generally speaking though, yeah, it seems kind of worthless though, especially concerning for the fact that I just wish there was actually more to it with that particular unlockable system, but I digress. And as far as I'm aware, as you can see, we now ended up in the most original zone out of all the 4 zones in this entire game. That's what appears to be White Park Zone, and usually relatively speaking though, I actually kind of like the existence of White Park Zone, because not only because it was original, but it's also about the fact that it does manage to contain, well, potentially speaking, it was about the fact that, well, yes, much like in Episode 1, although the levels are pretty much copied from the previous Sonic games, although the level gimmicks are still different, so generally speaking, I was about the fact that when it comes to White Park Zone, it looks like about the fact that it kind of reminds me like Twinkle Park vibes, except the fact that you can't able to actually interact with the actual carousel, as well as the forms of certain roller coasters, which we'll get into that in a minute. And usually kind of thinking about it though, is about the fact that regardless of the forms of how the fact that with for Episode 1 as well as Episode 2 of Sonic the Hedgehog 4, it does kind of reminds me like a similar vibes, as in, well, when it comes to the forms of backlashes or negative reactions for the likes of not only from Mario Party 9 as well as Mario Party 10, because relatively speaking, both Mario Party 9 and 10 are very similar to each other, and I feel like the same way for Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1 as well as Episode 2, which eventually though in the later Sonic games, specifically Sonic Mania and Sonic Superstars, they've somehow going back into the classic formula while sticking to the forms of the modern aesthetics and stuff like that, which it kind of does the same thing for the likes of the majority of the Mario Party games for the Nintendo Switch nowadays, with Super Mario Party Superstars, as well as the forms of, you know, recently Super Mario Party Jamboree. So either way though, and generally speaking, one thing I totally forgot to mention about this potentially, in order to able to actually unlock 2 of those characters in particular, both of which are Ninja and Pauline, is actually very simple, and you can able to actually easily unlock them within the first 5 minutes. And basically all you have to do for unlocking those 2 characters in particular is that you need to find them while simply trying to able to zoom in when it comes to looking through the binoculars. So yeah, that's actually quite simple, because unlike in the previous titles, you have to buy them or buy specific characters from the shopping menu, or unlocking them by doing specific conditions, or simply trying to able to level your status up when it comes to the party level from the likes of Mario Party Star Rush and stuff like that. So yeah, at the very least though, it's actually self-explanatory. Unlike the actual boards themselves, you have to increase your specific player rank, which as a result though, thankfully has been locked out behind achievements and stuff like that, which I fully appreciate about that. So but I digress. So There's also another thing worth noting in regards to the forms of what's been happening so far, is that out of nowhere in Walmart in America, apparently though they're going to be receiving a special DVD compilation set, and that's what appears to be Sonic the Hedgehog Saga So Far set, which does manage to contain not only Sonic the Hedgehog movie, the first one, as well as the second film, and out of nowhere they also decide able to include Knuckles the Series, because obviously though it is required, by the way, before we're able to actually dive into Sonic the Hedgehog 3 at some point until, well, 2 months from now. So generally speaking, I was about the fact I kind of believe that the days themselves goes by a lot more faster than I was expecting, which is pretty much as you expect, especially concerning for the fact that every time whenever I do play an RPG game, obviously though, the time itself just won't fly by, so you get the idea for this point. And as you can see right there, is about the fact that every once in a while though we somehow go past those little ring gates, and as a result though these can be activated, and then as a result though if you do manage to collect a certain amount of rings, you get yourselves a nice little bonus, which as a result it gives you some more rings, and that's about it. I thought it was a little bit weird that those Chaos Emeralds are a tad bit more bigger than Sonic and Tails' heads themselves, which is a little bit weird. But regardless of everything else though, is about the fact that the actual sprite itself, or the actual specific visual thing for the Chaos Emeralds, looks incredibly similar to Episode 1, so... But anyways though, so that pretty much does it for Act 1 in White Park Zone, and now we move on to the coolest level in the game in my opinion, and that's what appears to be White Park Zone Act 2, where it does manage to take place in a different setting, which as a result we now ended up in this roller coaster amusement park. So yeah, that's actually kind of interesting, despite the fact that usually, as I stated before, this game loves to able to bring up not only springs but as well as speed boosters, which obviously defeats the purpose of the lack of control. So generally speaking yeah, I just don't understand why that Dimps loves to able to reuse not only boosters or speed boosters but as well as springs themselves as well. And generally speaking, I was about the fact that, well, you get the idea for this point about the fact that every once in a while though there's going to be a lot of emphasis on autopilot sequence, and there's no way you can able to turn back. So, and obviously though, much like Episode 1, there's a lack of bonus stages when you try to touch the checkpoint, so as a result though, yeah, there's nothing new from here. Although I will say, the music is actually kind of alright in Act 2 of White Park Zone, because I know I've heard it from somewhere, but I'm probably not going to mention about this right now. So generally speaking, it's just because, no matter what though, I was wanting able to get this game, you know, trying to complete it and all that stuff. So generally speaking, and yes, much like in Episode 1, is about the fact that every time if you do manage to complete certain stage, basically though is about the fact that you can able to have an option to able to play through the next act by simply pressing the triangle button or the Y button, and including with the forms of episode medal as well. So generally speaking, is about the fact that although the noticeable differences this time is about the fact that the HUD UI is actually a lot more different. Well, mind you, that episode medal also has this particular HUD UI, but as a result for that particular matter what though, is about the fact that it makes things a lot more stylish more than ever will be. So alright, so there's nothing else I can really say about this level, I guess. Although I will still say though, is about the fact that the backgrounds looks much nicer this time around, and so a lot more better than the forms of this plastic grass texture from Episode 1 in my opinion, but that's besides the point. So, and believe it or not though, is about the fact that the first time I actually experienced this game was actually back in 2014, believe it or not, when I first got myself my PlayStation 3, back in 2014, so it's been about, you know, 10 years since when I first tried this game out, because unlike in Episode 1 though, I haven't exactly experienced this game day one, because obviously though, I didn't actually able to actually access to Wi-Fi connections for the Xbox 360, nor able to actually download Episode 2 of Sonic the Hedgehog 4, although generally speaking, I was about the fact that I totally appreciate about the fact that I managed able to try that game out for the first time back in 2014, and my reactions or my impressions of this game, despite it's better late than never I suppose, because as I stated pefore, Episode 2 of Sonic the Hedgehog 4 did manage to came out in 2012, the same year as Mario Party 9 came out. In addition to the films of Disney Pixar's Brave did manage to came out during that time, alongside with the films of a couple of DreamWorks movies within Madagascar 3, Europe's Most Wanted, as well as let's just say, Rise of the Guardians, which I'm assuming so anyway, though. Reminds you about the fact it's been a very long time since I actually have last seen Rise of the Guardians, ever since, back in quite a few years ago, because every once in a while, though, usually relatively speaking, though, actually, it's about the fact that recently, yesterday, that The Wild Robot has already came out on a big screen on the UK version. So as a result, though, I'm still very curious to check that film out, especially I've heard so many good things about it. And then potentially speaking, I was about the fact I just want to get the actual film too spoiled for myself, especially concerning for the fact I'm just very curious to check that film out. And usually, relatively speaking, it already received some very good reviews so far. So generally speaking, that's as far as I can try to say about the forms of news, discussions alike, because generally, all in all, though, is about the fact that when it comes to the forms of Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 2, that, as I stated this before, it's a little bit better than Episode 1, but it still has some issues, all things considered. Like, for instance, though, there's another issue I have with it, is about the fact that certain musical tracks, until specifically until the next zone, oh my god, you might see nothing yet. Especially concerning for the fact, I'm sure that, Jun Sano is once again involved with the actual, the contributions for the soundtrack, so generally speaking, that's nothing else I can really say about it. So, anyway, so now we're going back into this Winter Wonderland, except this time, we're now going into underwater the whole way through, during the forms within Act 3 of White Park Zone. And whenever I first got to this point, back in Journey Forms Event 2014, or technically 2015 for that matter, that this particular stage did give me a hard time at first glance, because sometimes though the first impressions didn't go too well, until likely also for multitude of playthroughs, or multiple replays and stuff like that. So generally speaking, that's as far as I can try to think about this, I guess. So, and of course, just like in episode 1, since we actually ended up in underwater, air bubbles is always important, just in case if you're trying to survive in underwater, then obviously though you have to keep on grabbing air bubbles as much as you can. So, yeah, nothing else I can really say about this, I guess. So, and also, on top of all that stuff though, is about the fact that I believe that this game does manage to take place around that particular time, after the events of not only for the likes of Sonic 4 Episode Metal, but alongside with the films of Sonic the Hedgehog CD 2011 remastered version, because as far as I'm aware, until when it gets to the point into whenever we go on to the next boss fight in the game, you might see, you might find out for yourself, especially concerning for the fact that, again, it's probably best if we save that particular topic for later. Although, much like in Episode 1, though, is about the fact that Episode 2 is also going to be extremely short, because as far as I'm aware, much like Episode 1, there's only 4 zones. So as a result, though, it seems kind of familiar, doesn't it? And it's also worth noting for is that certain objects are also very familiar. For those of you ever experienced both Sonic Colors as well as Sonic Generations, then you do realize about the fact that certain cube-like objects looks a bit similar to the color scheme for Cubot, doesn't it? However, though, Cubot was nowhere to be found in this particular episode, because as far as I'm aware, he only existed during the forms of other Sonic games these days, ranging from, he firstly introduced in Sonic Colors, all the way up to, let's just say, for instance, with Sonic Forces or something like that. Well, mind you, I haven't exactly played that much of other Sonic games these days, especially concerning I'm still basically excited for, Sonic X Shadow Generations to be releasing, so, still I'm incredibly hyped for that. So, but I digress. Oh yeah, there are some enemies that it does manage to require us to be able to perform a rolling combo ability, so just in case you can't able to deal with them that way. So generally speaking, I was about the fact that sometimes whenever I first experienced this level right here, that it did give me a hard time, as I stated before, on my first impressions, not only because of how the fact that we're going to be going underwater the whole way through, but it's also about the fact that it's pretty easy to get hit sometimes, even if you try to go after the certain special stage, specifically Special Stage 6 or Special Stage 7, once you get to this particular process, because obviously though, the main emphasis on this level right here is that there are a lot of robotic seals and stuff like that, or sea lions in particular, because obviously though it's about the fact that every once in a while they try to ambush you by trying to able to get you frozen and stuff like that, and that's how about the fact that again, the teamwork aspect decides to come into play, unless if you do want to able to destroy those sea leopard robots, then you can able to actually try to do it that way, although you have to be quick about it though, because otherwise though, not only do you able to get frozen at one point, but also you might get hit. So And as far as I'm aware, if you guys ever experienced Sonic Generations before, usually relatively speaking, you know with these particular warning signs that actually signifies danger, or in some cases bottomless pit is up ahead. Well, the actual warning signpost does make a return in this game, and as a result though, they are very similar to the likes of how it does in Sonic Generations, including with the forms of some other Sonic games I could probably think about on top of my head. Well, generally speaking, it's probably because I just want to able to get this game done before we're able to actually probably dive into, Sonic X Shadow Generations at long last specifically until next week. So either way, and there's that freebie extra life at the very end of a level, so yeah, that's always nice all in all. So either way, so generally speaking, I was about the fact that, well, you get the idea what I was expecting to talk about in terms of the forms of Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 2. Also, as far as I'm aware, I don't think there's going to be any mobile exclusive levels this time around, unlike in Episode 1. Because generally speaking, I was about the fact that there's only 2 levels locked out the mobile version in Episode 1, so I don't think it's going to be the case this time around on Episode 2, because it's usually, well, depending on what version of the game you're playing, it plays very identical. However though, there's actually another thing worth noting for, that Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 2 was the lineup for the Sake of Forever lineup on the mobile version, because you can't able to get the game for free. However though, if you really want to get out of your way to pay your extra money, well, you have to simply try to remove the adverts and stuff like that. So generally speaking though, and yes, much like in Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1, usually on the mobile version, it's all controlled with touchscreen controls, and good news folks is that there's no gyro sensing controls this time around, so I guess that's kind of a good thing if you try to play the game on the go. So generally speaking, that's what I can really think about it. And there's also the one on the release on that pretty miserable failure Onya, I think it's what it says anyway. Well, mind you, it's been ages since I've known about the forms of this miserable failure system, which as a result though, it only exists in Journey forms of in 2012 for some time. Although generally speaking, it was a good thing I didn't pick up that particular miserable device anyway, because not only because of this weird name, but it's also because of how the fact that the controller looks incredibly ugly as far as what I've seen on the actual screenshots back in the day, that is, Journey forms of some time in 2012. So yeah, you get the idea for that point. So, and yeah, every once in a while though, in these special stages by the way, I love the fact that you're able to actually get into the actual transition to another layers of the actual road up ahead, when it comes to if you managed able to go onto the springs and stuff like that. So I do like that particular concept, but either way though, and I somehow managed to fail this special stage by the way, so that's okay. Because as I stated before, much like Episode 1, I can able to retry as many times as I want, so there's no penalty for doing so. But if you try to pause the game a little bit too late, well, obviously though, if you accidentally manage to get all the way to the end, well, obviously though, your attempt of the special stage will fail. So either way. However though, unlike in Sonic the Hedgehog 2 though, if you do manage to able to succeed the special stage, you're now able to actually see, a lot of animations this time around. Like for instance, if you succeed a special stage, obviously though, Sonic and Tails are smiling when it comes to achieving the Chaos Emerald. However though, if you failed the special stage, they somehow got disappointed, and there was actually 2 different animations depending on what animations you'll see if you failed the special stage. I'm pretty sure anyway. Like for instance though, Sonic just goes like, are we doing this right? And then there's also another animation where basically Sonic just goes like, oh, I basically give up on this whole part, and all that stuff. So, well, mind you, again, it's been a very long time since I actually have last played this game for sure. So because of that though, yeah, you probably get the idea about that. So, and there's also another reason why, about the fact that the video's length for Episode 2 is actually a lot longer compared to the forms of Episode 1. It's probably because of not only certain stages can go by a little bit lengthier, but it's also certain boss fights might take a bit forever to beat, and on top of that, the special stage length might go a little bit further for its lengthy department, just because, well, it's all depending on how many tries if I was expecting to succeed by this point. So, but yeah, there's a lot of things I can probably think about it, but honestly folks, that's as far as I can try to say about this, I guess. Although I would have liked to explain more details until tomorrow, or specifically later on today, but I think it's probably best if we save more details about other stuff is going on, in terms of tomorrow that is. So either way, there's our 6th Chaos Emerald, but this time what appears to be the green color. So we've only got 1 Chaos Emerald left, So as a result, we'll definitely save that up until whenever we go on to the next zone, much like in episode 1, that is. So, and obviously though, if you do manage to complete the special stages though, obviously though, it's about the fact that your special stage will be unlocked during the stage selection screen, much like in episode 1. So generally speaking though, that's, you know, nothing new from here. And let's get on to the next boss fight, which is Metal Sonic Returns, or Metal Sonic Strikes, I should say, because I keep thinking about the forms of, the other level name as far as I'm aware, but I digress. So let's keep on moving forward, and that is where not only did we see Metal Sonic is actually having a ride on the Tails' rocket ever since at the end of episode Metal, if you want to know what really happens during ever since in last week, but also if you couldn't tell from the background, there's actually that familiar planet in the background, which is none other than Little Planet from Sonic CD makes its return. However though, it's actually under construction at the moment, so I'm guessing about the fact that Dr. Eggman is going to potentially try to build, let's just say, the latest Death Egg for trying to able to actually contain the little planet itself. So generally speaking, that's how the Sonic CD callback stuff is actually going to make a comeback. Although, however though, Amy Rose does not mention about it at all, or in some cases Amy Rose doesn't get it mentioned during the forms of this episode anyway, just because no matter what though, it's about the fact that much like episode 1, the review scores for the likes of Sonic 4 episode 2 is pretty mixed, especially concerning not only for its very short length, but as well as from that though, is about the fact that it lacks identity, which as a result though, and it's also worth noting for, is about the fact that, remember when I said this before, that there's no sign of episode 3 anywhere? Plus, I think it's probably best if we save that particular topic once, you know, Sonic X Shadow Generations is about to approach at some point, so either way. Oh jeez, I totally forgot about this attack. And now obviously though, if you fell down, that's an instant death. So, I will say that the Metal Sonic boss fight is actually a little bit more entertaining, so I think that's what they're going for here. So generally speaking, that was about the fact that, well, I will say that was about the fact that, while the music is a little bit repetitive, well, I will say that was about the fact that it does feel a little bit more better than the forms of how it does it on that normal boss music you find. Well, ever since in Sylvania Castle Zone, like, they somehow managed to go for that familiar boss theme music from episode 1, but a lot more pitch higher, or in some cases on steroids, and I was like, who could possibly thought that was a good idea with this particular boss track music choice? I mean, generally speaking, though, that's why I can really think about it, and I have no idea what's going on with this particular darker tone right there. Well, I suppose, no matter what though, I suppose, yeah, I have nothing else to say about this, I guess. So, yeah. That pretty much does it for White Park Zone. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting zone, especially considering it's the most original zone out of all the 4 zones in this game in particular. But either way though, again, that particular topic can't wait. Join at some point until tomorrow. So either way, so of course, just like in episode 1, we're able to actually access the world map right here. So you can able to choose whatever stage you want to go into. However, you do need to unlock certain zones this time around, as opposed to you able to unlock the majority of the zones from the very get-go. So yeah, that's one thing you might as well able to notice in this. So anyways though, so with that being said folks, is that we get endings off this point right here. So join me next time for the likes of Sonic the Hedgehog 4 episode 2, is that we're going on to the next zone in the game, which appears to be Oil Desert Zone. In some cases my least favorite zone in this particular episode, just because of one thing, but I'll explain more about that until tomorrow. So I'll see you guys until tomorrow. Later fellas.